I just bought this 2019 Ninja 400 for $2,500. Now, some of you, if you've done your research, may be wondering, Jekro, how did you get this bike for so cheap? It looks so nice. And the answer is it did not look like this when I bought it. It looked like this. A lot of the fairings were messed up. You can kind of see how it used to look here. This is kind of what the whole bike looked like. And it has a lot of miles, and it had a check engine light, and a lot of other things. So I'm going to go over whether or not today the Ninja 400 is a good starter bike. So first and foremost, let's talk about the price. This is going to be a big thing for a lot of you guys. So these bikes typically go, at least where I am at, for around like $4,000 to $5,000, depending on a lot of factors. Sometimes they'll go up to 6, sometimes they'll go down to 3. I bought this for 2.5, for example, but it had a lot of things wrong with it. And we'll kind of talk about that later. But the price on this bike compared to pretty much every other bike in this class, it's going to be about the same. The R3s can get a little bit more expensive. I would say this bike has a pretty decent amount of power for what you're paying for. Personally, I wouldn't pay more than like maybe 4 or 4.5K for this, but it's honestly going to depend a lot on your personal preference, what you think the bike is worth. Maybe you might hold on to this bike for a long time. I bought my first bike and only rode it for about 3 or 4 months or so before I upgraded, but everybody's different. So let's talk about the sound. This thing actually kind of sounds, I don't have it in neutral. This thing actually sounds kind of insane. So I'll start it up real quick. So this is the Leo Vince exhaust. I didn't put this exhaust on, the last person did. Here's what it sounds like. I'd say, honestly, for a 400, this thing sounds really good. In fact, it's almost at like the level and noise amount that I would say a 600 is at. The only difference is it's a 2-cylinder. You can definitely tell it's a 2-cylinder by the way it goes. But I would say it is really loud for a 300, 400 class motorcycle. At least with a exhaust mod. The stock exhaust on these bikes sounds really bad. So I would recommend the first thing you do is rip that thing off. Maybe even go with a full straight pipe, muffler delete, cat delete. But this exhaust sounds really, really nice. I actually really don't dislike it. This is probably my favorite sounding bike of all the bikes of this class. It sounds even better when you're riding it. Speaking of riding it, let's see how it rides. So my first bike was the Yamaha R3. It was a 2015, so not a whole lot older than this thing. This thing's a 2019. All right, so the audio in the video decided to just like explode. So we're doing a voiceover now. So anyways, the R3 that I started on is really similar in pricing and the features that it has compared to the Ninja 400. I mean, it's a 300 cylinder, so it is a little smaller, but honestly, the difference between 300 and 400 is negligible, at least to me. I also ride an MT-03, and I feel like this bike is not really any faster than that one, even with a rear sprocket replacement, well, which this thing has. So this thing has Vortex sprockets. It's a smaller rear sprocket, so if you're new to riding, it just makes it so that you have more torque but less top end power. On this bike, you're not gonna really use top end power that much because it doesn't really go that fast anyways. That is something that it has, which makes it a little bit harder for me to compare what the actual power is like compared to other bikes of this caliber. But to me, it's still like a good beginner level of slow. But it's not gonna be like insanely slow where you're like, holy crap, I can't even pass people. Like, it'll still give you a little bit of power. So pricing for the Ninja 400 compared to other bikes in this area, I would say the Ninja 400 is just better priced compared to the R3. If you look at the R3, the 2019 at least, or this generation that's kind of in this area, it's gonna get a little bit more expensive. For some reason, R3s right now sell for like $5-6 grand usually, which I think is just ridiculous. Like, you can get some for cheaper, but compared to this bike, for some reason these sell for less, which I think is good because I think you're getting more value from these. So that is a really good plus I would say the Ninja 400 has. Next, let's talk about the rider experience. So I would say this bike has a good ratio of aggressiveness and comfortability, which is going to be a big thing for new riders. When you're new and you're learning, you don't want to be leaned all the way over on the bike, like laying down on top of it like you do on a bigger bike. This thing's going to be a lot more comfortable. It's a lot easier to commute with for that reason. And if you're new to riding, you're not going to want to be breaking your back every time you're trying to go out to learn to ride. So that's a good thing, I would say. You're pretty much going to get the same kind of ergonomics in this bike compared to any other bike. I'd say they're all pretty much the same, so it's not going to matter that much. This one, I think, does have a slightly more aggressive clip-on position, though. I don't know if that's something that the previous owner did on this bike or not, but I mean, they are adjustable, so if you want to adjust them, you can make them more aggressive. It's totally up to you. But if you want to get a little bit closer to what that 600 feels like, or a liter bike, you can adjust those clip-ons, but I mean, it's not going to matter that much. Something weird that I find about this bike, though, is is kind of like the head area. I don't remember how it was on my R3, but I don't think like the front end of the bike feels like it sticks out just like a little bit more than I would like it to. I know on my CBR 600, the head of the bike is actually quite flat and pretty small relative to the rest of the bike. If you compare the Ninja 400's head, like with the headlights and everything, it kind of looks, if you think about it for a second, it looks like it's sticking out more, which you feel when you're riding. Like, it feels like the bike sticks out a bit ahead of you, which personally I don't really like very much. But I mean, that's kind of more of like a nitpicky thing. It's not really something you're gonna honestly care about, most likely. Okay, let's talk about some other beginner things that are gonna actually be important for you guys. So gear indicator, speedometer, tachometer, all the lights, ABS, it has all of it. So this version of the bike has ABS. I have the ABS one. I don't even know how to turn it off on this bike. I don't really like ABS, but if you're a beginner, you definitely should have ABS. It's a really good thing to have to learn how to properly brake, because when you start feeling that ABS come on, it means you're probably braking a little too hard and you need to kind of switch up the way you're doing things. I personally tend to brake a lot harder than I should on the rear brake. I do most of my braking on the rear brake, which is a bad habit, and ABS tells me that I'm doing that because I stomp on the rear brake and it starts shaking on me, and it tells me, hey, you need to give it more front brake and less rear brake, which is a really good thing for beginners to have, to give you that balance. And also, you're a beginner. The first time a car slams on the brakes in front of you, you're not going to brake perfectly, and the ABS is going to be very forgiving with that, and it's going to prevent you from losing your traction, which would be really, really bad. As a beginner, if you lose traction, you don't know how to control the bike, you're probably going to crash, very likely hurt yourself or die. So yeah, ABS is a really good thing to have. Another thing, so this bike has every indicator. It has a gas indicator, it has a gear indicator, which those two things, a lot of bikes have one or the other, or just don't have them. You know, my CBR for some reason doesn't have a gear indicator, which annoys the hell out of me, and I learned on the R3, which does have a gear indicator, so I kind of like got used to staring at it and knowing what gear I was in, and now I have to like actually use my brain to like remember what gear I'm in. So it could be looked at as a positive or negative having a gear indicator, but as a beginner, it is a super nice thing to have, because it's probably not like on top of your list of priorities of things you're thinking about while you're riding. So it is nice to have. And it also has the gas gauge, which, you know, some bikes like Yamaha R6, S1000 RR, just for some reason don't have a gas gauge, probably because they're more quote-unquote track bikes, more race bikes, so extra weight from the gas indicator is unnecessary, I guess, or something like that. But this bike does have it, which is really nice. And of course, the tachometer, speedometer. On a sport bike, you're going to get both of those, but yeah, that is also just good to have, I guess. So another thing about this bike that is really good for beginners is the slipper clutch. So this bike comes with a slipper clutch, which, if you don't know what that is, it just makes it so that the bike is going to match the gears a little better when you're shifting, and it's not going to skid the rear tire if you don't perfectly shift every single time, which is good and bad. So personally, at the level that I'm at now, I don't like the slipper clutch, because I like to be able to just do whatever I want. I want full control over my clutch and my revs. I don't know if it's the slipper clutch or clutch assist or whatever it is on the Ninja 400, but for some reason this bike is so hard to wheelie. Like, it doesn't fully let out the clutch on purpose on you. Anytime the revs change really quickly from one level to another, specifically from really high revs to low revs, if you're doing like a wheelie or something, the bike kind of like controls that, and it tries to like make that not happen. I don't know how to turn that off, and it makes it really hard to wheelie this bike, which is a reason that I honestly personally don't like it very much. But as a beginner, when you're first learning how to shift a motorcycle, having a slipper clutch is so nice. I'm teaching my friend how to ride, and he rides my MT-03 and this Ninja 400, and for him, this thing is so much easier to learn on, because that slipper clutch is so forgiving. It lets you shift gears without skidding the tire every time and jumping the bike around. And if you don't perfectly match the gear, the bike isn't going to jerk back and forth on you, which is super annoying and really honestly discouraging if you're a beginner trying to learn. Like the R3, the MT-03 do not have a slipper clutch. I don't know why. A lot of bikes nowadays do have it. I don't know why they don't, and it just makes it really hard to learn how to shift. But the thing is, it does make you very disciplined with your clutch, knowing how to exactly use it properly. But if you're brand new to riding, slipper clutch is really nice to have. So now let's get into some of the negatives. I just listed a bunch of positives about this this bike. So some negative things I would say are the way that this bike revs. So every time I ride a Ninja, whether it's a 300 or the 400, they just don't like to rev up very fast at all. Like if you compare it to an R3, which I know I'm comparing to a lot, but when I was trying to choose what I wanted for my first bike, I was in between the R3 and the Ninja 400. So I'm guessing you're probably somewhere also in that ballpark. On these Ninja 300s and 400s, they just like don't like to rev up quickly. So when you pull that throttle back, whether you're moving quickly or moving slowly, it just takes us like a little bit longer for those RPMs to get up compared to what they would on another bike. I think it may be a torque thing. I'd have to look up, honestly, I don't know the specs to the bikes. I just know how they feel. And you can look up the specs. I mean, you don't need to watch a whole YouTube video for me to tell you what the specs are. I'm here to tell you what the riding experience is like. So anyways, I think it may be a torque thing. The R3 likes to rev up really quickly, which makes it really easy to wheelie. And the clutch likes to catch too. On this bike, so if I rev it up super high and I dump that clutch, it for some reason keeps the clutch in on me. Like the physical clutch is dumped, but the bike continues revving high and it slowly comes down, and the front wheel just barely comes off the ground. I don't know why it does that. I'm guessing it's some kind of clutch assist feature, which if you're new is nice to have, but if you want to learn a wheelie, it's gonna make your life pretty hard, at least from my experience. And it also makes this bike a little bit harder to kind of drop a gear and disappear, so to speak. Like if you want to just drop a couple of gears, pull that throttle back and just get moving, this bike is kind of hard to do on that with that, because it just doesn't have that like torque capability, which going back to the Yamahas do. However, I would say another plus about this motorcycle though, this is definitely one of the best, maybe the best sounding bike of this like class that I've ever heard. Probably the closest contender I would say is the CBR 500. That bike also sounds really nice when you get an aftermarket exhaust on it, but in my opinion, the Ninja 400 just sounds really sweet. Like with this Leo Vince exhaust, you can't really tell in the video. The video does not do it justice in my opinion. It sounds genuinely like so good in real life, so good. And I'm not a fan of like twin cylinder engines at all, the way they sound. I really love my 4 cylinders, but this thing just sounds incredible. I'm a big fan of the way it sounds, and I would say it's almost up to par with like an R7. Like it kind of sounds similar to the R7, which is kind of insane considering how small this engine size is compared to the R7. R7 is still a lot louder, but still, this one is still really loud for the size of the engine. At least with this exhaust, you get some crazy little burbles, which I love. And I'm a big sound guy. That makes a huge difference for me when I'm riding. And if the bike doesn't sound good, it kind of messes with my riding experience a little bit. And I will say the R3 MT-03 do not sound very good at all. Those bikes literally sound like lawnmowers. They're terrible, and I would say probably the worst sounding bikes in this class, whereas the Ninja 400 is probably gonna be the best. So yeah, big plus for the sound. If you pull up to your school or your college or work or wherever, and there's some hot ladies walking by, and you give them a little rev in this bike, everyone who walks by who doesn't know anything about bikes is gonna think this thing is the most monstrous, amazing sounding, coolest motorcycle in the history of the world. And I mean, it does sound really good, I'll have to admit. Another thing I kind of like about this bike, this is like super not important at all, and not like it doesn't matter really, but this is kind of a personal like gripe I have with a lot of like these slightly older motorcycles, is that when you turn off the low beam, one headlight turns off and then the other one is on. I hated that on my R3. I hate that on like the Yamahas and a lot of these older bikes that have like 2 big old headlights. It annoys me. I just think it's a dumb design. The Ninja 400 doesn't have that, which I think is really nice. Both the lights turn on, and when you turn the high beams on, there's a little light that turns on in both the headlights, which is just so nice. Like, it's a really stupid complaint that I have, but I mean, that's just a personal opinion of mine. So because of like the seating position on this bike and kind of like the sound level of the exhaust, it sort of feels sometimes like this bike is trying really hard to be a bigger bike, if that makes any sense at all. I don't really have any other way of explaining it, but it feels like this bike is trying to like literally act like a 600, and it can't, because it simply doesn't have that power or torque level of a 600. But if you're trying to ride a smaller bike and you want to sort of get a slight taste of what that big bike feels like, I would say this is probably going to be the closest you're going to get at this price range. Since my 600 has been broken down for like months now, I haven't been able to ride it. I would say for the money that I'm spending, this is probably the closest that I'm going to get to that without actually buying an actual 600, which is, I mean, that's nice. It's nice to be able to kind of get a taste of that again. But the thing is, it's sort of almost like an imposter in a way. The bike is trying to be that, but you know it's not a bigger bike, you know it's not a fast bike, and maybe you're fine with that, maybe you don't really care at all, which is fine. But for me, like, I kind of personally like the way that the R3, the MT-03, they kind of act like their size, if that makes any sense. Like, they're not trying to be super aggressive, like bigger sounding bikes, especially the MT-03. Like, it knows its size and it knows that it's made just for hooning around on the street and just kind of messing around. It's not trying to be a big bike. It's not trying to act all tough the way that the Ninja 400 does, in a way, which to me I kind of like. But to you might want a bike that's gonna act a little bit more aggressive, and kind of maybe you want to impress some people. It's your first bike, you're new to motorcycling, and you kind of want to look cool in front of all the ladies and stuff. This is definitely going to be the bike to do that. I would say looks wise also, the Ninja 400 does a really good job. It's a good looking bike, like, I can't lie. I'm personally not a Kawasaki guy at all. I don't know if I've made that clear in this video. I'm a Yamaha fanboy, but these bikes, like the Ninja 400, looks really good. If you compare it to other bikes of this year, I'd say the Yamaha R3, honestly, in my opinion, I think the Yamaha R3 looks better, but the Ninja 400 doesn't look bad. Like, it definitely looks like a nice bike. And it also, I'm pretty sure it has the same body styling as the Ninja 636 of this generation, which I think is like super odd. Like, I'm gonna have to look up like the bikes side by side to kind of compare them, but I don't know why they look so similar. But I mean, I've kind of had people mistake this bike for a ZX6R, which is kind of funny. Oh, another thing about this bike that I forgot to mention. So the way that the weight works, this is kind of a really important point. I probably shouldn't have put this last, but the weight of this bike compared to the, I'm comparing it to the R3 a lot, just because that's kind of my basis, my foundation. But compared to the R3, this bike is a lot heavier. And one big complaint I have about it is it feels very top heavy, which can make it slightly more difficult to maneuver. So if you're newer, you're gonna have to put in a little bit more like oomph when you're moving it around compared to other bikes. My MT-03, that thing just loves to get thrown around. It is so light, I can just do whatever I want with it. This thing is it's definitely noticeably heavier. I would say that it's probably more top heavy just by the way that it feels when you're riding it. And a big complaint I have about Kawasaki's is the way their kickstands work. I'm sure there's some kind of kickstand mod out there that'll fix it, but all Kawasaki's, they just have the longest kickstands in the world, and the bike leans over so far when you park it, which it might be a little bit harder to tell in like video, but in person, oh my gosh, it like scares the hell out of me. Every time I put the kickstand down on one of these bikes and lean them over, it feels like it's gonna fall over. Like, that's how far it leans. Like, I've never experienced that issue except on a Kawasaki. I don't know why they lean like that. Maybe it can be considered a good thing because it'll be harder for them to fall over on the other side. I personally really don't like it. And I also find it very difficult to rotate the bikes because of that, because the center of gravity on this bike is so much farther away from the kickstand. It's really hard to turn them compared to other bikes. Even my CBR 600 is so much easier to turn than this bike, and that bike is literally heavier. It's just because of the way that the kickstand sits on the ground compared to the bike. It's so hard to rotate this bike, which I really don't like. You're gonna have to live with that unless you want to get some kind of kickstand mod. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on this bike. Should you buy this? So if you're the kind of person who wants to impress people, if you want a bike that sounds really good, that's gonna be great for learning on, but maybe isn't going to be the best if you want to do a little bit beyond just learning. So if you want to impress people, if you want the bike that's going to teach you how to ride, this is the bike to get. It's a good price, it's great for all those things. But if you want a bike that's going to take it a little bit further, if you're looking for a bike to wheelie on, a bike to kind of really mess around with on the streets, you're not really looking to impress people, this probably isn't going to be the bike for you. This is more of a stepping stone bike. There's a reason everyone buys this as their first bike. It's just probably the best option for learning on. If you ride this bike, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Maybe some of my opinions are stupid. I mean, they are opinions. So yeah, this is my second YouTube video ever. So if you liked my voice or something, I don't know, subscribe. But I mean, yeah, I'll bring more content in the future. See you guys.